Yep. Without objection, the requests are granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2017, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Veasey, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the subject of this special order.
Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 60 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this was a sad week for our country. We saw anger, despair, chaos at American airports when people from all different types of backgrounds from the Middle East were banned from coming into the United States. We had individuals that were green card holders that were denied entry into the United States. We had individuals that were interpreters for our United States military that kept them safe in the Middle East that were denied the right to come into the country. And it was a sad day in our country's history. This past weekend, I took my son to an exhibit at one of the synagogues in Fort Worth, Texas, where I live. And it was an exhibit on Jews and baseball. And there was a picture of Hank Greenberg and Joe DiMaggio. And Joe DiMaggio in American lexicon is about as American as you get. But in looking at the exhibit and the caption that was next to it, it talked about how while Joe DiMaggio was fighting for our country in World War II, the United States government listed his parents as enemy aliens. And to think about that, we revisit that sort of sad chapter in our history where individuals were treated that way in our country. I think that it's very sad, Mr. Speaker. We have a lot of members that would like to express their discontent at what happened, and I'm going to ask our chair, Mr. Cedric Richmond from the state of Louisiana, to come and address us because what we have to talk about tonight is very serious. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Congressman Veasey, for the work that you do representing Fort Worth, Texas. Let me just say, Mr. Speaker, that it is a privilege and an honor to be the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus. We represent almost 80 million Americans, 17 million of which are African American. But the real reason is because it's a talented group of 49 people, and we're going to need each and every one of them to keep track of this rapid schizophrenic style of governing that we are dealing with. And I'll just talk about the 2 most egregious things this past week, and that is the allegations of voter fraud and his nomination of a person to run the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice and his unconstitutional ban on Muslims. Since 2010, 20 states have restricted voting rights by enacting discriminatory voter ID and proof of citizenship laws, illegally purging thousands of proper voters from the rolls, cutting back early voting, limiting voter registration, and engaging in other suppressive tactics. These laws were put in place to combat the notion of voter fraud, despite the fact that there's no evidence of wide voter fraud in the United States. More than a dozen recent investigations and studies all show voter fraud to be virtually non-existent. A 2014 Washington Post investigation found 31 incidents of voter fraud in the more than 1 billion ballots that were cast in elections at all levels of government from 2000 to 2014. Of the more than 137 million ballots cast in the 2016 election, election and law enforcement officials in all 50 states have yet to report any indications of widespread voter fraud. But if there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud, What reason could anyone, including the president, have for this claim? Well, the truth is Republicans have used voter fraud, the voter fraud lie, to restrict voting rights for years. Voter ID laws have been sponsored by Republicans and passed overwhelmingly by Republican legislators. Richard Posner, a conservative U.S. Circuit Court judge appointed by President Reagan, has called the concerns about voter fraud a mere fig leaf intended to justify laws that appear to be aimed at limiting voting by minorities, especially blacks. In July 2016, a U.S. Circuit Court struck down North Carolina's law, calling it the most restrictive voting law North Carolina has seen since the era of Jim Crow. The judges charged that the Republican lawmakers had targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision. Now, let me just turn very briefly to the president's ill-advised, unconstitutional executive order that purportedly promotes national security. Keeping America safe is a top priority for all of us, but this order is wrong. It's wrong because it makes us less safe, and it's wrong because it goes against our American values. This is the latest in President Trump's series of actions showing that his number one priority is short-term shows of intolerance instead of the long-term security of the American people. Actions by the Oval Office directly affect people's lives. When the president is making policy up on the fly, it has real harmful consequences in the lives of everyday Americans. The fact that the Secretary of Homeland Security, a committee in Congress which I serve on, was not included in discussions about implementing the executive order, even though this department is in charge of its implementation, is clear evidence of a broken system. Shutting out the mothers, children, fathers, and families who are fleeing the same violence that we fight against is exactly what ISIS and similar groups want us to do, and it only strengthens their hands. This haphazard order does nothing to keep Americans safe. In fact, it hurts our efforts to fight against terrorism. Let me just say, Mr. Speaker, to my colleague from Texas, that the President of the United States, when addressing Liberty University, cited 2 Corinthians, which most church-going people in the country would say is 2 Corinthians. But he cited 2 Corinthians 3 and 17, which says wherever the Lord is, that there's liberty and freedom. But there can't be liberty and freedom without meaningful access to the voting polls. But if the president would have just stopped, he didn't need to get to verse 3, chapter 3. He really could have just stopped at the first few paragraphs of 2 Corinthians, which says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ." And goes on to say, "who comforts us in our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble." So the question becomes, why go to Liberty University and offer your Christian values, which always talks about the least of these in the Bible, and what are we doing to help others, and do unto others as you would have them do unto us, so that as soon as mothers and children and families are fleeing persecution and certain death, we put a wall up around our countries, we shut down our airports and say, we don't care what trouble you're in, you just can't come here. That goes against everything that this country was founded on. It goes against my Christian values, and it goes against any purported Christian values of anyone in these United States of America. And with that, I will yield back the balance of my time.
I'd like to thank the chairman for his comments, and I did not mention that we are also talking about voting rights, which is very important on the eve of the president about to make the selection for the next Supreme Court Justice of the United States. And Representative Plaskett, I know with you representing the Virgin Islands and understanding the importance of voting rights. That's very significant. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you for being a voice both in terms of refugees and immigration rights, and also the very important issue of voting rights.
Thank you, Mr. Veasey. And I first would like to thank the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, my friend and colleague, the Honorable Cedric Richmond, for his continued leadership of this caucus and his leadership on the issues impacting Black America and other minority communities across this great nation. And indeed, this evening, we are discussing not only minorities in this country, but those downtrodden and other individuals around the world who look to America for refuge, strength, and democracy. I would also like to thank my colleague, the Honorable Mark Veasey of Fort Worth, Texas, for joining me in chairing this evening's Special Order Hour, and also my Congressional Black Caucus colleagues who are joining us this evening to speak on these important issues. Mr. Speaker, we are here tonight to speak to those two very important issues that go to the fabric of our founding. Our ability to grow, diversify as a nation by bringing in the tired and the poor, the innovators, the ones who bring new changes to this country and continue its dynamic growth, as well as voting rights. Last week, President Trump, among a number of other things, expressed unsubstantiated claims of widespread voter fraud in the 2016 presidential election. The remarks that we heard would appear to be inaccurate, reckless, and dangerous to our democracy, in some of our opinion. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues and I are here this evening to highlight the real voter fraud in this country, and that is the continued attempts to suppress minority voting rights across many states, as well as the outright denial of the right to vote for millions of Americans living in the territories. I want to underscore that the fight for equal voting rights for minorities in this country did not end with the passage of the Voting Rights Act. In fact, today, more than 50 years after our esteemed colleague John Lewis and others courageously marched on Selma, we have seen the United States Supreme Court strike down one of its most important protections. Within hours of that decision, states were already moving forward with restrictive voter ID laws, which have already been rejected as discriminatory under the Voting Rights Act. 6 of the 16 states that passed voter ID laws since 2010 have a documented history of discriminating against minority voters. The state of Alabama, in 2014, began enforcing a controversial voter ID law that required voters to show a state-issued ID in order to vote, and then announced plans to close 31 driver's license offices, most of them, ironically, in rural, impoverished, majority Black counties, making it even harder for residents to get the most common form of ID used to vote. In addition to the Supreme Court's action, a federal court in 2015 ruling used a racist, century-old opinion of the Supreme Court to uphold the denial of voting rights to American citizens in my home district of the United States Virgin Islands and the citizens and residents of the America's Island territories. They are called the Insular Cases, and the opinion was authored, ironically, by the same justice who wrote Plessy v. Ferguson. March marks 100 years that my district has been a part of this country, but our service dates back to its very founding through the Virgin Islander and founding father, Alexander Hamilton. He would be, I think, very upset to find out that people from the island in which he came could not vote for their president and commander-in-chief. Even though the Virgin Islands and the territories have the highest rates of military service in the United States and have exponentially higher rates of casualty per capita in any of the wars, in Afghanistan and Iraq, we believe have earned the right to take part in this democracy. In another example, last year, a federal appeals court decisively struck down a North Carolina voter identification law and noted its provisions deliberately target African Americans with almost surgical precision. That's a quote of the court, in an effort to depress Black turnout at the polls. That, to me, sounds like voter fraud and voter suppression. Mr. Speaker, these are just a few examples of the real voter fraud happening across this country. The members of this caucus continue to work to ensure that all American citizens, regardless of their race, income, or location, can participate in this great democracy. And we implore the President to direct his efforts to investigate voter frauds at these and other issues. But we want to, as the Congressional Black Caucus, address another issue, because we don't just represent African Americans or minorities here in this country. We want to address an issue that is of great concern to me and members of this caucus. And as demonstrated by massive protests this weekend and right across the street here this evening at the Supreme Court, the concern of a large majority of America is that this President's executive order to ban refugees' entry into this country. Banning entry to people fleeing persecution is perhaps diametrically opposed to the foundational fabric of this country as you can get. Mr. Speaker, not only is the President's refugee ban mean-spirited, misguided, it undermines our democracy, undermines our efforts to thwart terrorism, and is an affront to all who have sacrificed to defend it. Viewing all refugees fleeing as suspects shows an extremely myopic understanding of the real threats and plays to extremist propaganda. The refugee ban will not make us safe. It would have done nothing to prevent the 9/11 terrorist attacks, nor the others that followed. The terrorists of those attacks were American citizens, some of whom were even on the terror watch list and still allowed to legally purchase deadly weapons used to carry out their terrorist plot. If this, Mr. President and Congress, wants to protect the American people from terrorism, they should pass the no-fly, no-buy legislation that House Democrats stood to support. Mr. Speaker, there are many of my colleagues here this evening who would love to speak on this issue, and I'd like to call some of those, and I yield time at this time to Ms. Bonnie Watson-Coleman from the Garden State, from the state of New Jersey, who will for 2 minutes speak to this House on the issues that the Congressional Black Caucus is taking up this evening.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding to me, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his first full week as president, Donald Trump continued to make a mockery of the ideals upon which our nation was founded. In addition to his de facto Muslim ban is contrary to the national security interests of the United States. His actions are not only discriminatory and bigoted, but also reckless, dangerous, and counterproductive to any authentic effort to defeat terrorism. As a member of the House Homeland Security Committee, I am concerned this will only serve to stoke anti-American sentiment across the globe, including our international partners committed to eradicating global terror threats. My colleagues have outlined ways in which men and women they represent have been impacted at this present moment and highlight the uncertainty that those constituents feel about the future. But we cannot forget those who have come to this country in pursuit of the future that the American dream has promised. Close to 17,000 students from the 7 affected countries attend U.S. colleges and universities. The 12th District of New Jersey represents these men and women, both young and old, at a multitude of 2-year, 4-year, and technical institutions. The president of Princeton University, one of the most revered institutions in the world, housed in the heart of my district, released a statement concerned that the success of Princeton and many other institutions of higher education across this nation depend on America's ability to attract and engage with talented people from around the world. Rutgers University, the flagship public university in my state, has students, researchers, and professors from all 7 countries on Trump's barred entry list who are currently traveling outside of this country. The impact on university personnel was felt most immediately after the executive order went into effect. 2 Iranian nationals who are associate professors at the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth were detained Saturday upon arrival at Boston's Logan Airport. Today, I talked with university officials in my district who have faculty members that need to return home in order to renew visas but are afraid to leave. At another college, 1/4 of their applicants come from the countries that are impacted by this ban. A constituent in East Brunswick who is non-Syrian political refugee sits in limbo as only one of her 4 minor children passed through our already thorough and extensive processing and was approved for a visa. USCIS put a hold on the processing of the remaining 3 due to lack of communication and direction and understanding from this travel ban. By feeding off of fear, hatred, and bigotry, this administration's incendiary Muslim ban has created confusion, disruption, and chaos that is rippling around the world. As our federal agencies and international partners seek to understand and combat this meritless policy, I called on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, on which I sit, to hold an immediate hearing with leadership at the Department of Homeland Security to review concerning reports about the crafting and execution of this president's order. I also requested that the House Homeland Security Committee, which I also serve on, to move up its February 7th hearing on this issue so that we may urgently address the national security implications of this administration's actions. In short, Mr. Speaker, this is the United States of America. We respect diversity because this is a nation founded and made great because of immigrants. We're not going to stand by and allow this President Trump, with his un-American ideals, to push forward on American policies. Understand that we will resist at every turn. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady from New Jersey for her comments, and now would like to call the gentlewoman from the state of Illinois, Ms. Kelly. And want to thank Ms. Kelly for all of her work on so many issues that are important. I know that voting rights is particularly important to her, with her representing the Chicago suburbs and the city of Chicago itself.
I want to thank Congressman Veasey and Congresswoman Plaskett for holding tonight's CBC Special Order Hour. With so much going on in our nation right now, it is important that all Americans take seriously our responsibility to be guardians of our democracy. We owe it to those who came before us and those who will be here long after us to keep this democracy and its values moving forward and reject the rhetoric and policies that take us backwards. I was reminded of this just a week ago when over 3 million Americans of all ages, races, and religions marched for women's rights, justice, and equal rights. 3 million, a powerful resistance to concerning policies that we're seeing come out of the White House. Just last night, I was with scores of activists and families at Chicago's O'Hare Airport, protesting President Trump's executive action barring refugees from entering the United States. I wish that things hadn't come to this. It is a tragedy that these United States, this shining beacon of democracy around the world, the land that welcomes the tired, the poor, and the huddled masses, has witnessed a president in his first week in office attempt to strip away our values as an inclusive democracy with an unconstitutional executive order and Muslim ban. Our Constitution, our laws, our democracy is what we must hold dear as Americans. We must be wholly intolerant of those who seek to pervert our Constitution. We must not tread on our democratic values. As part of tonight's conversation is protecting voter rights, I'm reminded that the past presidential election brought with it evidence of election hacking and cries of illegal voting. For the first time in the history of this nation, we're seeing a president who is intolerably obsessed with his failure to receive the popular vote. Many of the families that I hear from find this obsession unbefitting of a student council president in Kankakee, where I represent, let alone the President of the United States. Without evidence, President Trump continues to claim that 3 million illegal votes in California and New York cost him the popular vote. 3 million people, the number by which Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. I hardly find that to be a coincidence. Mr. Speaker, the election is over. The bunting and ribbons have been cleaned up. It's time to govern. A continued relitigation of the election based on unfounded and divisive claims of further fraud divides our nation further. I yield back.
I'd like to thank the gentlewoman from Illinois, and now going to call someone who also has a really good understanding of civil rights, voting rights in the state of Virginia, but then also the plight of immigrants and has a deep level of empathy because the other part of his state is very much a diverse state with people made up from various parts of the world, and that would be representing the 4th Congressional District of Virginia, Representative Donald McEACHIN.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank the gentleman as well as the gentlewoman for leading tonight's conversation about so many issues that are important to the American people. Mr. Speaker, the President's baseless executive order on immigration has hurt this country. It has hurt this country to the extent that it has made us less safe, and has hurt this country to the extent that it goes against our values as a nation. Mr. Speaker, our Constitution says that we will not favor any religion over another. Yet the President has instituted a religious test for entry into this country just 1 week after his inauguration. Mr. Speaker, this is a travesty. This rule has inconvenienced travel back to America over the weekend for any number of permanent residents and those of all backgrounds who serve our country. Mr. President, I know this because it's actually impacted citizens of the 4th Congressional District. Mr. President, I have a constituent who has been a permanent resident for 20 years. He had visited his family in Cairo and was on his way back to Virginia when he was turned around. He was actually sent to Qatar, Mr. Speaker, where he has no connections, where he has no business. He was just sent there because he was denied entry back home. Mr. Speaker, my congressional staff worked around the clock, along with his employer, to get him back home, and thanks be to God, he is indeed home. But Mr. Speaker, this is unacceptable, and it cannot go on. I can't help but think of Leviticus chapter 19, verse 34, where we are reminded, Mr. Speaker, to treat the foreigner in our midst as if he was one of our own. Mr. Speaker, the President's order does not do this. It is an offense to all Americans. It's an offense to the Judeo-Christian ethic. Mr. Speaker, it cannot be allowed to stand, and I will work every day along with my colleagues in the CBC and other like-minded individuals in this Congress to reverse this order. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McEACHIN, and thank you for sharing that story about your constituent. It's, again, it's such a terrible and shameful time for our country, for the world to have seen that. And now from Ohio, I'd like to call the gentlewoman from that represents the Columbus area, Mrs. Joyce Beatty.
Thank you so much to my classmate and colleague, Congressman Veasey, and to my colleague, Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett. Thank you for convening tonight's special order hour for the Congressional Black Caucus. Mr. Speaker, we're here for 2 topics tonight, and you will see many of us come and talk about these topics. So to my colleagues, let me just cut my message short and say that we are here because we all witnessed over the weekend President Trump's latest executive order barring immigrants, refugees, legal permanent residents from 7 Muslim-majority countries. This has set off a protest across the nation. I was so proud that I was able to stand in my 3rd congressional district with families and individuals protesting his unilateral move that is not making us safe. It flies in the face of the values and the freedoms enshrined in our Constitution. Mr. Speaker, I am here because we had individuals in my district who were held in the New York airport, while many others weren't freed like they were. That's why I will continue to stand up to President Trump and stand with my people. We are also here tonight to respond to another unsubstantiated but extremely dangerous claim made by President Trump. We know that last week he doubled down on his assertion that he would have won the popular vote, Mr. Speaker, if you deduct the millions of people who have voted illegally. Obviously not satisfied with winning the Electoral College, Trump continues to focus on defending his national popular vote of almost 3 million votes. He now believes, without any evidence to support his claim, that 3 to 5 million people voted fraudulently in the 2016 election. While this is par for the course for the Trump campaign, but now that he is in the White House, Mr. Speaker, he intends to make this voter fraud untruth the subject of an actual government investigation mandated by a soon-to-be executive order, wasting untold amounts of taxpayers' dollars. Well, when the Congressional Black Caucus hears people using terms like voter fraud, illegally voted, and strengthening up voting procedures, we read between the lines. And that is why we are here tonight to stand up against voter fraud that he's saying, because we know it's voter suppression. Thank you to my colleagues, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlewoman from Ohio, a state that knows a lot about voter suppression, also a very international state, and now representing Los Angeles, one of our most international cities in the world that I'm sure was impacted very greatly by what happened at airports this weekend. And the representative from Los Angeles, Karen Bass.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your leadership tonight, Representative Veasey, and also Representative Plaskett. Let me share with you, especially Representative Plaskett, that on my first day here 7 years ago, one of the first things that happened was a motion on the floor to further deny the right to vote for representatives from the territories. And I have to tell you that I think for myself, as well as the majority of people in our country, we don't realize that you only have democracy 50%. And so I'm glad that you raised it tonight. And I think it's very important that we continue to fight so that people from the territories will have the full representation in our country. I rise today to address the travesty that is taking place in our country, a travesty that has resulted in innocent people, students, grandparents, mothers, fathers, and children being unable to travel and enter the United States. People are caught in a web of suspicion and hatred as a result of the recent executive order, which is nothing less than a religious ban. So today I speak for the Africans that are caught in that ban. So let me give you an example of who has been caught up by the Muslim ban. A brilliant Stanford student, Miss Noreen Ulmer, studying anthropology. She is a graduate of Harvard who is from Sudan and has lived in this country since 1993. She has a green card and is a legal resident who was returning to the U.S. from research in Sudan. She was detained for 5 hours and handcuffed simply because she is from the Sudan, the very same country that President Obama worked long and hard to improve relations and to move the country and the region forward. Another example, a Somali woman and her 2 children detained at Dulles Airport for 18+ hours as a result of the Muslim ban. According to reports, the children have U.S. passports and their father was allowed to stay in the U.S., but his Somali wife would have been deported were it not for the emergency stay granted by the New York federal judge. Then there are refugees, mostly Somali, stuck in Kenya following the cancellation of their flight as a result of the executive order. These stranded travelers had been waiting, according to the UN High Commission of Refugees, 10 to 15 years to resettle. And I speak of 7 people who are reportedly being detained at the airport in my city, Los Angeles Airport. All of these situations are a result of the president's executive order, which, despite the protestations from the administration, is nothing less than a Muslim ban. I also speak of persons fleeing for their lives from Libya who are now stigmatized worldwide because of this ban. Day 10 of the Trump presidency. Heaven help us. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Representative Bass, for your commentary representing the very international city of Los Angeles again, a city with many immigrants, with many people that have contributed to the greatness and vibrancy of that city that we know as Los Angeles. And just really do appreciate all of your input on that. And now I'm going to call up to come and speak Mr. Dwight Evans. Mr. Evans, hailing from Pennsylvania's 2nd Congressional District, a state that also is very international. I'm sure that your state was heavily impacted by the travel ban that was implemented by the Trump administration, and I believe the world needs to hear your remarks tonight. So thank you for being here tonight to speak.
I too want to join and thank Representative Veasey and Representative Platt for this opportunity. Tonight I stand with my colleagues urging support of policy solutions that will ensure our communities have unfettered access to the ballot box. Call for solutions to Republicans-led attempt to suppress minority voting right across the country. Additionally, I must state my views of the recent action taken by President Trump, which I assert have reduced the national trust in our democracy. In the short time since President Trump has taken office, he has set forth a national security plan that would require broad spending increases. He has set forth an executive order to repeal the Affordable Care Act without a replacement in place. He has seemingly put us in the direct odds with Mexico, our bordering country, due to a wall that he has set forth as one of his key proposals, and then even demand that they actually pay for it. He has ignored the facts and has declared that 3 to 5 million people allegedly voted fraudulently in the election. And last but certainly not least, he has set forth an executive order banning travel from Muslim countries and suspended the refugee program, an action that makes our nation less safe. Over the weekend, I joined with the Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf, Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney, Representative Robert Brady, Representative Brenda Boyle, and spoke directly with those who were immediately impacted by this executive action. We joined with the protesters in voicing extreme discontent over the executive order and vowed to do our part to remedy what we can, referring to as a forced error of global proportion. We must work collectively to tear down the ban and to be open to democracy that our Constitution allows us to be. Just today, the acting Secretary General, Sally Yates, told attorneys in the Justice Department not to make legal arguments defending President Trump's order on immigration and refugees. The action taken by President Trump are not in the best interests of our nation, our national security, nor are they in the best interests of our communities. That is why we must continue to move forward towards policy proposals that have been introduced by my colleagues to ensure equal access to the ballot box, to ensure we protect the voting rights of those in our communities so that they know that their voices are being heard. For instance, my House colleague, Representative Sewell, introduced the Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would set forth a geographical coverage formula that is based on the current conditions that include 13 states. The bill will establish a rolling nationwide trigger, continuously move so that only states that have a recent record of racial discrimination and voting will be covered. The Voting Rights Advance Act would set forth greater transparency in federal elections to ensure that voters are made aware of the late-breaking changes in voting procedures and would deter discrimination from occurring and protecting voters from discrimination. Let us continue to ensure the voices of our communities are heard. My colleagues and I stand united, ready to combat these actions and run counter to the best interests of those who are elected. With that, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
I want to thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania, and just like the city of Philadelphia, just like the city of Los Angeles, when we heard from Congresswoman Bass earlier, you know, oftentimes the state of Texas is portrayed through popular culture as not being a very international place, but we are a very international place, and everyone has heard of the stories how every state legislative session, which one has just began a couple of weeks ago, how Black and Hispanic voters in particular in the state of Texas are targeted so our voting participation numbers will decrease. Well, someone who has been in that fight to help protect Black and Latino voters in the state of Texas, to expand voting rights in the state of Texas. And not just that. Again, in pop culture, our state has oftentimes been portrayed as one way, but a lot of people forget that the city of Houston is the fourth largest city in the country and one of the most international cities in the entire world. One of the largest ballots in the entire country, printed in I forgot exactly how many languages. Ms. Congresswoman SHEILA Jackson-Lee can tell you that later. And so not only are voting rights being impacted in her district, but also I'm sure that she felt the plight of many of the people that she represents that were stuck at airports, including the Houston International Airport, by the Muslim ban that was implemented by the Trump administration. And so at this time, I'd like to call on Congresswoman and my fellow Texan, SHEILA Jackson-Lee, to the microphone.
Let me thank the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Veasey, and the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, for their continuing leadership on a very important and needed response to the actions of many, in particular this new administration. My time is short, and so I want to thank Mr. Veasey for his leadership on the challenge to the voter ID law, and as well his continued leadership on the empowerment of voters, as well to Ms. Plaskett for and fighting for the right to vote for the Virgin Islands. I stand with both of them. But I come today to plea or to plead and also to enunciate what crisis we find ourselves in. The White House is in crisis. When the White House is in crisis, that means America is in crisis. And Mr. Speaker, it is not a frivolous statement that I make, it is a truthful statement. Because less than 72 hours ago, without the counsel of many experts, members of Congress who are on the jurisdictional committees, without the notice and input of the Secretary of Homeland Security, an executive order was produced by one young staffer in the White House and another individual who has pushed an agenda of exclusiveness. That is not the way to run this country. And so this executive order came out, and what we find is that 67,000 refugees are stranded around the world who actually had documents, were vetted, and as some stories have told us, waiting 12 to 13 years, 10 years, to be able to get in line and to be vetted to come to the United States of America. The tragedy is that some of them were, in fact, our friends from Iraq who had stood by our military personnel, who had in fact provided them the interpretation that they needed to save their lives. And in one story that we heard tonight on the steps of the United States Supreme Court, a woman who finally got here with her 2 children, her husband was murdered, her father was tortured. And so to Mr. Trump, today I think it is important, as we have joined in to repeal, to rescind this unconstitutional order, it is clear that you need to read the writing on the wall. The Deputy Attorney General, duly appointed and confirmed of the U.S. Department of Justice, the remaining individual who has power in that office, has made a very conscious decision that they cannot defend this order because it is unconstitutional. This is not a person who takes her task lightly. This is not someone who is not an officer who has not taken an oath of office. This is akin to what happened in the Nixon administration. They were willing to lose their position to stand for the Constitution. And so the Congressional Black Caucus is on the floor today with our chairman, Mr. Richmond, to be able to inform America that this is patently unconstitutional. It does not provide for due process. It did not provide for equal protection of the law. And as well, it is a blatant attack on freedom of religion. And for those of you who need a better explanation, let me tell you what a ban on Muslims is. A ban on Muslims is 1 country, 2 countries, 7 countries. And the idea of who cannot come in are Muslims. That is a ban on Muslims. It is not a ban on Christians. It is not a ban on any other faith. It is a ban on Muslims, and the White House needs to understand what an interpretation of that means. Further, let me say as I come to a close, please do not try to cover yourself with the announcement that was made by President Obama. As a member of the Homeland Security Committee, I'm well aware of that announcement that he had regarding a number of countries. It was not a ban. It was to take note that those countries were in conflict and that individuals who are coming from those countries specifically needed to have a higher level of scrutiny. It was not a ban. And it is well documented that the tragedies that we've had from Boston to Orlando to San Bernardino were not individuals who came through as refugees or came from those particular countries. What are we doing here? We are blatantly violating the Constitution. And when the President of the United States violates the Constitution, this body has to stand up and respond. And so I would ask this body to direct the President to rescind. In the alternative, I would ask that legislation that is being introduced call upon the President to repeal this. In all fairness, I would appreciate if the President took it up on his own to suspend this order that is impacting on so many who are being left along the highway of despair, people who are able to, if you will, people and individuals who are able to seek refuge here are now being left. I believe that the Congressional Black Caucus, the conscience of the Congress, stands now tonight to seek to ban the Muslim ban and to seek to stop the suppression of voting and to also say to the nominee for the Attorney General, are you prepared to represent all of us and to be able to support the institution or reinstitution of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act? I yield back.
I want to thank my colleague and fellow Texan, Congresswoman SHEILA Jackson-Lee, for clearing up a lot of the misconceptions that are being purposely spread out there, that this was something that was used by the Obama administration. It absolutely was not. It's being purposely spread on social media, and people are lying about the past and what happened. It is completely different, and I want to thank her for clearing that up. And now I'd like to call my colleague from Newark, from New Jersey, the gentleman representing the eastern coast of New Jersey, Mr. Donald Payne.
Mr. Speaker, first let me thank the gentleman from Fort Worth and the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands for heading these special order hours. It is an honor that I had prior to them, and I'm sure that they see the importance of being able to spearhead topics that are important for today. Mr. Speaker, President Trump's claims of widespread voter fraud are unsustained. Officials in both parties have said that there is no evidence of large-scale voter fraud. A comprehensive investigation found only 31 possible cases of impersonation of fraud out of 1 billion votes cast in all elections between 2000 and 2014. President Trump lost the popular vote by 2.8 million, and it looks like he's looking for an excuse. What's worse is that President Trump's unfounded claims will encourage Republicans to double down on their assault on voting rights. There is no significant evidence of fraud, but President Trump claims will be used to cover the suppression, cover up the opportunities to suppress the vote. he is already talking about launching a major investigation into non-existent voter fraud. The only thing that would come from such an investigation would be further restrictions on voting rights. If President Trump wants to investigate anything, he should investigate the real voter fraud taking place in Republican-led attempts to suppress minority voters. The strategy of Republican legislatures in some states has been to suppress votes by instituting voter ID laws, reducing hours for early voting, and closing polling places. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, in 2016, 14 states had new voter restrictions in place for the first time in a presidential election. This presidential election was the first in 50 years without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act. As a country, we should make it easier and as open as possible for people to exercise the right to vote. Election officials should not erode our democratic principles. They should make sure that every American citizen has an equal voice in the democratic process. Protecting every person's right to vote is essential to fully functioning democracy. The countless men and women who have risked their lives to defend the right knew our system of government only works when it is inclusive and fair, when it enables all voices to have a say. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
I want to thank the gentleman from New Jersey, and now would like to call him a friend and colleague representing a critical state, a state that some people think actually went a certain direction in the presidential race because of voter suppression tactics. That is the gentlelady from the state of Wisconsin representing the city of Milwaukee, Congresswoman GWEN Moore.
And thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the gentleman from Fort Worth and the lady from the Virgin Islands for yielding this time to me. I can just tell you that, you know, it's deja vu all over again. When President George W. Bush lost the election in 2000, he engaged in a lengthy investigation over so-called voter fraud to deflect from the fact that he, in fact, lost the popular vote, as did President Donald Trump. And these allegations of voter fraud do nothing but to continue to bankrupt the Treasury. When, as the gentleman from New Jersey just pointed out, Loyola Law School did an extensive study, and they found 31 cases of voter impersonation out of 1 billion votes cast in the last 14 years. We don't have enough time for me to do the math on that, but it's de minimis. I can tell you that what real voter fraud is voter suppression. In 2016 was the very first presidential election in 50 years, gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, that we didn't have the full protection of the voting rights in 14 states. And it showed, including in my own swing state of Wisconsin. Brand new voting ID restrictions that disproportionately suppressed African American and low-income citizens' votes. According to a federal court, nearly 300,000 registered voters in Wisconsin, in my state, could not obtain the voter ID required by these new, the imposition of these new laws. And throughout the country, we saw 868 fewer polling places. We saw these voter ID laws. We saw just a reinvention of these painful and unjust poll taxes, remnants of poll taxes and literacy tests imposed upon African Americans. I can tell you, if there is any voter suppression, it's voter denial in this country, and I would call for, instead of spending taxpayer dollars to find 5 million votes that President Trump claimed voted for Hillary Clinton, I would rather spend that money investigating the Russian hacks into our election. And I would yield back to you.
I want to thank the gentlewoman from the state of Wisconsin, and now also from another international part of the country, from the Oakland Bay Area, my friend and colleague, the gentlewoman from California, Barbara Lee.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank you, Congressman Veasey, for yielding, for your tireless work to defend civil rights and justice. Also to Congresswoman Plaskett, thank you for continuing to speak out, to organize us, and for your stellar representation of your district. Mr. Speaker, in his first week as president, Donald Trump advanced dangerous conspiracy theories and enacted a Muslim ban that undermines our nation's standing in the world. These actions show that President Trump will peddle his alternative facts no matter the consequences. Now, let me be clear. This approach to governance threatens our democracy and our national security, and we must resist it. For starters, we cannot allow President Trump to erode our right to vote. Access to the ballot box is the cornerstone of American democracy. Yet he spent his first week in office peddling the baseless myth that 3 to 5 million people voted illegally in our election. Mr. Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. Both Republicans and Democrats have dismissed this myth as unsubstantiated. But the president continues to insist that millions of fraudulent voters cost him the popular vote. Let's call this what it is. This is a campaign by our highest elected officials to fabricate reasons why he lost the majority of popular votes. And he will use these blatant falsehoods to further undermine access to the voting booth. Mr. Speaker, this investigation that's being proposed, it really is a sham. The real attack on America's elections comes from Republicans who make it harder for people of color, young people, and low-income people to vote. I ask for unanimous consent that an editorial from the New York Times be submitted for the record. The voter fraud fantasy.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If he were serious about protecting access to the ballot, he would join members of the Congressional Black Caucus in our call for the restoration of the Voting Rights Act. Since it was gutted in 2013, millions of minority voters have been prevented from casting their votes. Last year alone, hundreds of thousands of minority voters were disenfranchised before and on Election Day. Instead of launching investigations based on alternative facts, President Trump should be investigating the widespread efforts to disenfranchise voters, including the use of outdated voting machines, the mishandling of provisional ballots, the improper purging of voter rolls, and the widely reported incidents of intimidation and misinformation at the polls. These are the true threats to our democracy. If these threats are not enough to occupy President Trump's attention, he should turn to the widespread evidence of Russian interference in our elections. The facts are available and in need of bipartisan investigation, but President Trump has no interest in evaluating facts. He'd rather focus on falsehoods. But the president's attack on our democracy, these attacks aren't restricted to these alternative facts about election results. This weekend, we witnessed the erosion of another American value, our proud tradition as a refuge for immigrants of every religion. President issued an executive order banning immigrants and refugees from the United States on the basis of religion. This outrageous executive order to shut people out from several Muslim nations runs counter to our fundamental values that we cherish, as Americans. It's morally reprehensible and will only make the United States less safe. The order has done nothing but create chaos and fear among refugees and immigrants who have been admitted or have been approved to come to the United States. This nation is and has been and always will be a nation of immigrants and refugees. This is who we are. We don't turn our back to those in need, and certainly we do not do so on the basis of religion. This is a watershed moment for our country, a moment that brings into question our moral character. Thousands of Americans took to the street to protest the Muslim ban. Really, this is what the resistance must look like. Tonight, many of us joined our colleagues on the steps of the Supreme Court to demand a reversal of this hateful policy. So we will continue to fight every attempt to erode our values to appease ideology and radical special interests. Our new bill, Statue of Liberty Values Act, also known as the SOLVE Act. This bill would reverse President Trump's Muslim ban executive order and ensure that funds or fees shall be used to implement the order, shall not be used to implement the order. And so I hope everyone signs on to Congresswoman Loughran's bill. The President's order, it harms our families, our economy, and our national security. Once again, this is not who we are as a nation. We are better than this. We must wake up and fight because really the future of our democracy is at stake. So I want to thank you both for giving us a chance to talk about this tonight. My district is a district of immigrants. People are very afraid. We are a sanctuary district, and what is taking place now is totally un-American. Thank you again.
I want to thank the gentlewoman from California for your remarks, and Mr. Speaker, thank you. We'll yield back the balance of our time.
Thank you. And members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the President. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2017, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.